Act 1, Scene 2 opens in a public place in Rome. The stage direction tells us that Caesar enters with Antony, Calpurnia, Brutus, Cassius, Cass and several other important Romans. There is also a great crowd following them. Notice one very important detail: the Soothsayer is also among the crowd. At first, everything appears festive and celebratory. But Shakespeare quietly places the Soothsayer inside this celebration. That is our first hint that something dangerous is coming. So visually, we should think of this scene as celebration on the surface, danger underneath. Caesar first calls Calpurnia. She immediately answers, "Here, my lord." The word lord shows her respect for Caesar. Caesar then gives her an instruction. He tells her, "Stand you directly in Antonius' way, when he doth run his course." In simple English, stand directly in Antony's path when he runs in the race. Caesar is giving a clear command. He then calls Antony, Antonius. And Antony respectfully answers, "Caesar, my lord?" Notice the hierarchy here. Caesar gives orders. Others respond. Now we come to an important cultural detail. Caesar tells Antony, "Forget not, to touch Calpurnia." Why? Because, according to Roman belief, touching a barren woman during this sacred race could remove her sterile curse. Barren means unable to have children. Sterile has a similar meaning here. The phrase, holy chase, refers to the sacred race associated with the festival. Notice also Antony's reply, when Caesar says, "Do this," it is performed. In simple English, if Caesar orders something, it is done. This shows Caesar's authority. Finally Caesar says, "Leave no ceremony out." So this short passage establishes three things: Roman religious tradition, Caesar's authority, and the obedience of those around him. The celebration is interrupted. The Soothsayer calls, "Caesar." Caesar immediately asks, Who calls?" Cass tells everyone to become silent. Then Caesar says something interesting. He says he hears a tongue shriller than all the music. The word shriller means sharper or higher pitched. Shakespeare creates strong auditory imagery here. The entire celebration is full of music and noise, yet one voice manages to cut through everything. That voice is the voice of warning. Caesar turns to listen, and that prepares us for one of the most famous lines in the play. The Soothsayer now gives his famous warning, "Beware the Ides of March." The Ides of March means March 15th. So in simple English, Caesar, be careful. March 15th will be dangerous for you. This is one of Shakespeare's clearest examples of foreshadowing. The audience is being told that something terrible is connected with this date. Caesar wants to see the man who has warned him. Brutus identifies him simply as a soothsayer, meaning a person believed to predict or understand future events. Cassius then calls the man forward. The atmosphere has changed completely. We have moved from celebration to warning. Caesar asks the soothsayer to repeat himself. The answer is exactly the same: beware the Ides of March. But Caesar refuses to take the warning seriously. He calls the soothsayer a dreamer. In simple English, he is imagining things. Ignore him. This is dramatic irony. The audience knows that the warning is important, even though Caesar dismisses it. The stage direction then tells us that everyone leaves except Brutus and Cassius. And that is extremely important. The public celebration is over. Now Shakespeare moves into a private political conversation. After everyone leaves, Cassius begins his conversation with Brutus. He asks, "Will you go see the order of the course?" Brutus simply says, "Not I." Cassius encourages him. But Brutus explains, "I am not gamesome. That means, I am not playful or cheerful." He says he lacks some of Antony's quick spirit, meaning Antony's lively energy. So already we see a contrast. Antony is enjoying the celebration. Brutus is thoughtful and serious. Brutus then says he does not want to interfere with Cassius's wishes and says he will leave. But Cassius has no intention of letting him leave yet. Cassius now begins his psychological approach. He tells Brutus, "I do observe you now of late. In simple English, I have noticed your behavior recently." He says he no longer sees the same gentleness and love in Brutus's eyes. The reference to Brutus's eyes creates visual imagery. Cassius is suggesting, "You have changed. You are becoming distant from me." Notice the emotional pressure. Cassius presents himself as a hurt friend. But he is also creating an opening through which he can influence Brutus. Brutus now explains himself honestly. He says that if his face looks troubled, it is not because he dislikes Cassius. His problem is inside his own mind. The key phrase is, poor Brutus, with himself at war. This is a metaphor. Brutus describes his inner conflict as a war. There are no soldiers fighting here. The battle is happening inside Brutus's mind. He is struggling with thoughts and feelings that he has not yet explained. This is our first major glimpse of Brutus's inner conflict. He is not naturally cold or unfriendly. He is simply deeply troubled. Cassius now uses a clever psychological technique. He asks Brutus, "Can you see your face?" Brutus gives a logical answer, "No, Cassius, for the eye sees not itself." In simple English, you cannot directly see your own face. You need a reflection. This ordinary observation becomes a powerful metaphor. Cassius is preparing to say, just as you need a mirror to see your face, you need someone else to show you your own worth. And that someone, Cassius is about to suggest, is himself. Cassius now flatters Brutus. He says Brutus does not have a mirror that can show him his own hidden worthiness. This is still the mirror metaphor. Then Cassius claims that many respected Romans speak highly of Brutus. He says these people are groaning underneath this age's yoke. A yoke is something used to control or burden. So Cassius is suggesting that Rome is suffering under Caesar's growing power. And then comes the flattery. These Romans supposedly wish Brutus could see his own greatness. Cassius is carefully building Brutus's confidence. He wants Brutus to think, perhaps I am the man Rome needs. Brutus is not immediately convinced. He asks, into what dangers would you lead me? This is important. Brutus senses that Cassius may be trying to influence him. But Cassius responds cleverly. He returns to the mirror metaphor. He says, I, your glass. That means, I will be your mirror. Cassius claims that he can show Brutus qualities that Brutus does not recognize in himself. This is clever persuasion. Cassius is presenting himself as a helpful friend. But underneath that friendly language, he is preparing to manipulate Brutus. Cassius now tries to prove that he is trustworthy. He asks Brutus not to be suspicious of him. He says he is not the kind of man who flatters everyone, makes false promises, hugs people publicly and then criticizes them privately. Why does Cassius say all this? Because he wants Brutus to trust him. This is important because Cassius is actually planning to manipulate Brutus. So there is an interesting difference between what Cassius says about himself and what he is actually doing. The crowd suddenly erupts in celebration. Brutus immediately connects the shouting with his greatest fear. He says, I do fear, the people choose Caesar for their king. This is the first time Brutus openly expresses his political fear. Notice the word, king. A king represents concentrated and potentially absolute power. Brutus does not want Rome to become ruled by one man. But then he says something equally important, yet I love him well. So Brutus's problem is not hatred. It is conflict between love for Caesar and duty to Rome. This is central to Brutus's character. This is one of the most important statements about Brutus. He says that if Cassius is talking about the general good, meaning the good of Rome, then Brutus is willing to face even death. Shakespeare creates a powerful contrast. Honor vs death. Brutus says he values honor more than he fears death. This tells us something fundamental about him. Brutus is not motivated primarily by personal ambition. He believes that honor and duty are more important than his own life. That is why Cassius knows Brutus could become extremely important to his plans. Cassius now attacks the idea that Caesar is naturally superior to everyone else. He says, I was born free as Caesar, so were you. This is the key argument. Cassius says, Caesar is a human being. I am a human being. You are a human being. We were all born free. He also says he would rather not live than live in fear of another man. Cassius is therefore trying to remove the psychological distance between Caesar and ordinary Romans. His message is, Caesar is not a god. He is a man. And if he is only a man, why should Romans submit to him? Cassius now tells Brutus a story from his past. The Tiber River was rough and dangerous. Shakespeare calls it an angry flood. That is personification because the river is described as though it has human anger. Caesar challenges Cassius, darest thou leap in with me? In simple English, are you brave enough to jump into this dangerous river with me? Cassius says he immediately jumped in. Then he told Caesar to follow. And Caesar did. Cassius is using this story to make Caesar appear less powerful than his public reputation suggests. Now Cassius makes himself the hero of the story. The river is so powerful that Caesar eventually cries, "Help me, Cassius, or I sink." That is a major moment in Cassius's argument. He wants Brutus to remember that the mighty Caesar once needed Cassius's help to survive. Cassius then compares himself to Aeneas, a famous hero from Roman mythology. Aeneas carried his father Anchises away from the flames of Troy. Cassius says that he similarly carried Caesar out of the Tiber. This comparison makes Cassius sound heroic while making Caesar sound weak. Cassius now attacks Caesar's image even more strongly. He sarcastically says, "This man is now become a god." But immediately he reminds Brutus that Caesar is physically weak. He remembers Caesar having a fever in Spain. Caesar shook. His lips lost their color. His eyes lost their brightness. He groaned. The key phrase is, "This god did shake." That is deeply ironic. A god is supposed to be powerful and invincible. Yet this supposed god was shaking with fever. Cassius's message is simple. Do not worship Caesar. He is only a man. Cassius continues mocking Caesar. He reminds Brutus that Caesar's tongue normally commands Romans to admire and record his speeches. But when Caesar was ill, that same voice cried, "Give me some drink, Titinius." Cassius compares him to a sick girl. The contrast is deliberate. The great public Caesar is compared with the weak private Caesar. Cassius then asks how a man with such a feeble temper can become so powerful. Bear the palm means to be first or to win. So Cassius's question is essentially, how can such an ordinary and physically weak man become the greatest power in Rome? Another cheer comes from the crowd. Brutus assumes that Caesar is receiving more honors. Cassius responds with one of Shakespeare's most famous images. He doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus. A colossus is something enormous. Cassius compares Caesar to a gigantic figure standing over the world. This is a simile because Shakespeare uses the word, like. Then Cassius describes ordinary Romans as petty men. They walk beneath Caesar's huge legs. This is not really about physical size. It is about political power. Caesar has become so powerful that other Romans feel insignificant. Now Cassius gives Brutus his central argument. He says, men at some time are masters of their fates. In other words, people can control what happens to them. Then comes the famous statement, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. Cassius rejects the idea that fate is responsible. He says that Romans are underlings because they allow themselves to be underlings. Then he begins comparing the names Brutus and Caesar. Why should the name Caesar sound greater? Cassius says, write the names. Say the names. Weigh the names. Even use them in magic. Brutus's name is just as powerful. This is clever psychological manipulation. Cassius is feeding Brutus's pride while pretending to encourage equality. Cassius now becomes openly emotional. He asks, upon what meat doth this our Caesar feed, that he is grown so great? Of course, Caesar is not literally becoming physically huge. Cassius means, what has made Caesar so powerful? He then attacks Rome itself. He says Rome has lost its tradition of producing noble men. Then comes clever wordplay. Now is it Rome indeed and room enough, when there is in it but one only man? The words Rome and room sound alike. Cassius is saying that Rome has become a place with room for only one important person, Caesar. This is a powerful criticism of dictatorship and excessive individual power. Cassius now makes a very clever move. He reminds Brutus about an earlier Brutus. This historical Brutus represents opposition to kingship and tyranny. Why does Cassius mention him? Because he wants the present Brutus to live up to his family name. The hidden message is, your ancestors defended Roman freedom. Will you allow Caesar to destroy it? This is one of Cassius's most effective methods of persuasion. He appeals not only to Brutus's political beliefs but also to his family honor. Brutus now shows that Cassius's words have affected him. He says, what you would work me to, I have some aim. In simple English, I have some idea of what you are trying to persuade me to do. That is very important. Brutus understands Cassius's direction, but he does not immediately agree. He asks Cassius not to push him further at this moment. So Brutus is still thinking. He has not yet made a decision. Brutus does not agree immediately. Instead, he says he will consider what Cassius has said. He will listen carefully and respond when the time is right. Then he gives Cassius a very important statement. He says, Brutus had rather be a villager than to repute himself a son of Rome under these hard conditions. In simple English, I would rather be an ordinary villager than proudly call myself a Roman if Rome has become a place where freedom is lost. The phrase, chew upon this, is a metaphor. It means, think carefully about this. Brutus is showing that the condition of Rome genuinely concerns him. Cassius is pleased. He says his words have brought some fire from Brutus. That means he has awakened strong political feelings in Brutus. Then Caesar returns. Brutus immediately notices something unusual. He sees an angry spot glowing on Caesar's brow. Calpurnia is pale. Cicero has ferret and fiery eyes. A ferret is a small animal known for its sharp, alert appearance. Shakespeare uses this visual description to show that something has gone wrong. The festive mood has completely disappeared. Now Caesar and his followers appear tense and disturbed. Caesar now speaks privately to Antony. He says he prefers to be surrounded by men who are fat, relaxed and able to sleep peacefully. But then he looks at Cassius. Cassius has a lean and hungry look. Caesar believes that people who think too much can become dangerous. Notice something interesting. Caesar is actually correct about Cassius. Cassius is dangerous. So Caesar has good political instincts here. The problem is that his confidence may prevent him from acting effectively on those instincts. Antony reassures Caesar. He says Cassius is a noble and respectable Roman. Caesar responds, would he were fatter. This is almost humorous. But then Caesar admits something revealing. He says that if he were capable of fear, Cassius would be the first person he would avoid. This creates irony. Caesar says, I fear him not. But his entire speech shows that he is clearly concerned about Cassius. So Caesar's pride does not allow him to openly admit fear. Caesar now explains why Cassius worries him. He says Cassius reads much and is a great observer. That means Cassius is intelligent and carefully watches human behavior. Caesar also points out that Cassius does not enjoy plays or music. He rarely smiles. And when he does smile, it seems as though he is almost angry with himself for allowing himself to enjoy something. This makes Cassius appear serious, analytical and emotionally controlled. And Caesar considers this combination dangerous. Caesar concludes his analysis of Cassius. He believes that men like Cassius are unhappy when they see someone greater than themselves. Therefore, Caesar considers them dangerous. Then comes the important statement, for always I am Caesar. In simple English, remember who I am Caesar. This shows enormous confidence, but it also reveals Caesar's weakness. His confidence can become pride. He refuses to think of himself as someone who can genuinely be afraid. That confidence will later become important. Caesar and his followers leave. Cass remains. Brutus pulls Cass by the cloak and asks what happened. Brutus says, tell us what hath chanced today. Cass responds sarcastically, you were with him, were you not? Brutus replies that if he already knew what happened, he would not be asking. This short exchange establishes Cass's personality. He is blunt, sarcastic and direct. Cass now explains what happened. A crown was offered to Caesar. Caesar pushed it away. The crowd cheered. Brutus asks about another noise. Cass says, why, for that too. Cassius asks about the third cry. Again, why, for that too. The repetition makes Cass's account sound almost ridiculous. It also prepares us for the fact that the crown was offered 3 times. Brutus now asks directly, was the crown offered him thrice? Thrice means 3 times. Cass confirms it. But he adds an interesting detail. Each time Caesar rejected the crown, he did so more gently. That detail becomes important. Cass suspects that Caesar may not have been completely unwilling to receive it. And we now learn that Antony was the person offering the crown. So the scene raises an important question. Was Caesar really rejecting power, or was he enjoying the public attention? Brutus asks Cass to describe exactly how the crown episode happened. Cass answers sarcastically, I can as well be hanged as tell the manner of it. He means, I would rather be hanged than bother explaining such foolish behavior. He says it was mere foolery. He also corrects himself. It was not exactly a crown. It was a coronet, a small crown. But the important point is his opinion. Cass believes he would fain have had it. In simple English, Caesar actually wanted it. So again, appearance and reality may be different. Cass continues. The crown is offered again. Caesar rejects it again, but Cass says Caesar seemed very loath to remove his fingers from it. That means, Caesar seemed reluctant to let it go. Then the crown is offered a third time. Again Caesar refuses. The crowd becomes wild. They shout. They clap. They throw their sweaty nightcaps into the air. Shakespeare gives us strong sensory imagery here. We can almost hear and see the noisy crowd. But Cass's sarcastic tone makes the entire spectacle seem ridiculous. Cass's description becomes deliberately comic. He jokes that the crowd's stinking breath almost choked Caesar. Then Caesar fainted. The word swounded means fainted. Cassius is surprised. He asks, did Caesar swound? Cass confirms it. Caesar fell in the marketplace. He foamed at the mouth. And he became speechless. The contrast is striking. This is supposed to be the mighty Caesar. Yet in front of the Roman crowd, he suddenly becomes physically helpless. Cass uses humor to reduce Caesar's greatness. Brutus thinks Caesar may have the falling sickness, an old term for epilepsy. But Cassius gives the phrase a completely different meaning. He says, Caesar hath it not, but you and I have the falling sickness. Cassius does not mean that Brutus and Cass are physically ill. He means that Romans are falling beneath Caesar's power. So this is a clever double meaning. Caesar falls physically, but Cassius suggests that ordinary Romans have fallen politically because they allow Caesar to dominate them. Cass, however, does not understand the deeper meaning. He simply says, Caesar fell down. Cass says he does not understand Cassius's political joke. He is simply certain that Caesar fell. Then he makes a very interesting comparison. He says the crowd behaved towards Caesar like an audience behaves towards actors in a theater. They clap when they approve. They hiss when they disapprove. This creates an important image. Politics has become a kind of performance. Caesar is performing before the crowd. And the crowd is reacting like an audience. Brutus now wants to know what Caesar said after recovering. Cass goes back to what happened immediately before the collapse. Caesar noticed that the common people were happy that he had refused the crown. Then Caesar dramatically exposed his throat and offered it to the crowd. It is almost like an actor performing for an audience. Caesar is presenting himself as a humble man who does not want power. But Cass's description makes the performance seem exaggerated. Cass continues his sarcastic account. He says that if he had been willing to act on Caesar's offer, he might actually have killed him. Then Caesar explains his behavior by calling it his infirmity. That means illness or physical weakness. Caesar is essentially asking the crowd to excuse him. And it works. 3 or 4 women immediately feel sorry for him. They cry, alas, good soul, and forgive him. Cass, however, does not trust this emotional reaction. He believes these people would support Caesar almost regardless of what he did. Cass now exaggerates to show how blindly loyal Caesar's supporters are. He says, if Caesar had stabbed their mothers, they would have done no less. This is obviously an exaggeration. Cass means that their loyalty is so strong that almost nothing Caesar could do would make them stop supporting him. Brutus then asks whether Caesar left looking sad. Cass simply answers, I. That short answer keeps Cass's blunt style. Cassius asks whether Cicero said anything. Cass answers, I. He spoke Greek. Cassius asks what Cicero meant. Cass refuses to explain because he did not understand Greek. Then comes the famous expression, it was Greek to me. This means, I could not understand it at all. This is humorous wordplay. Cass is admitting his own lack of understanding in a very witty way. Cass now mentions another important political event. Marullus and Flavius have been punished for removing decorations from Caesar's images. This tells us something important. Caesar's public image has become almost sacred in Rome. People are expected to honor his image. Cass, however, describes the whole affair as more foolery. His sarcasm continues throughout the scene. Cassius now invites Cass to dinner. Cass refuses the first invitation because he already has plans. Cassius asks about tomorrow. Cass says yes, but adds 3 conditions. He must still be alive. Cassius must still want him there. And the dinner must be worth eating. Again, Cass's humor is dry and sarcastic. Then he leaves. Now Brutus and Cassius are alone again. After Cass leaves, Brutus comments on him. He calls him blunt. Here, blunt means direct, rough or lacking politeness. Brutus remembers that Cass used to be lively when they were students. Cassius says Cass's roughness is actually part of his charm. He compares Cass's rudeness to sauce added to food. This is food imagery. Just as sauce makes food more enjoyable, Cass's roughness makes his clever words easier to endure. It is a small but interesting character observation. Brutus now prepares to leave. He tells Cassius that they can meet tomorrow. Cassius agrees. But his final instruction is extremely important. Till then, think of the world. This does not mean simply, think about the planet. Cassius means, think about the condition of Rome and what is happening around you. He wants Brutus to continue thinking about Caesar's power. Brutus leaves. And now Cassius is finally alone. This is when we discover his real plan. Now Cassius reveals his true thoughts. He says, Brutus, thou art noble. But then he says something much more revealing. Thy honorable metal may be wrought. The word, wrought, means shaped or worked. Cassius compares Brutus's character to metal that can be shaped by a blacksmith. In simple English, Brutus is honorable, but I can influence him. Then comes the question, for who so firm that cannot be seduced? In simple English, who is so strong-minded that nobody can influence them? Cassius clearly believes Brutus can be persuaded. Cassius now admits something personal. He says Caesar dislikes him. But Caesar loves Brutus. This matters because Cassius knows that Brutus has Caesar's trust. And that makes Brutus extremely useful. Cassius even says that if he were Brutus and Caesar were Cassius, he would not treat Cassius as kindly. There is jealousy here. Cassius envies the respect and affection Caesar has for Brutus. Now Cassius finally reveals his complete plan. He will write letters. But these letters will be written in several different hands. Why? Because he wants Brutus to believe they come from different Roman citizens. This is completely false. Cassius himself will create them. The letters will suggest that Rome admires Brutus and that Caesar's ambition is dangerous. This is psychological manipulation. Cassius understands that Brutus cares deeply about Rome. So he will make Brutus believe, the people of Rome are calling upon you. The conspiracy is therefore beginning with deception. And finally, Cassius reveals his ultimate intention. He says, let Caesar seat him show. In other words, let Caesar feel completely safe. But then, we will shake him, or worse days endure. The word, shake, is metaphorical. Cassius means, we will challenge Caesar's power. And this is where the scene ends. Notice the journey Shakespeare has taken us through. We began with a public celebration. Then came the soothsayer's warning. Brutus revealed his fear of Caesar becoming king. Cassius manipulated Brutus. Caesar revealed his suspicion of Cassius. Cass described the crown episode. And finally Cassius secretly planned to deceive Brutus with false letters. So the conspiracy has not yet begun with swords. It begins with words. Persuasion, deception, manipulation. And that is the real power of Act 1, Scene 2. So, if you remember only one thing from Act 1, Scene 2, remember this. This is the scene where Brutus begins to be won over. Caesar is celebrated publicly, but danger surrounds him. The soothsayer warns him. Brutus fears that Caesar may become king. Cassius recognizes Brutus's concern and carefully feeds it. He flatters Brutus, questions Caesar's greatness, reminds him of Roman freedom, and finally plans to use fake letters to convince Brutus that Rome needs him. At the same time, Caesar himself recognizes that Cassius is dangerous, but his pride prevents him from taking that danger seriously enough. And Cass gives us a sarcastic picture of Caesar's public behavior. So the entire scene can be remembered through one chain. Warning, power, fear, persuasion, manipulation, conspiracy. That is the dramatic purpose of Act 1, Scene 2.